Let's go ahead, and we did not get started here Wednesday night with some artifacts, some archaeological discoveries that shed light on the New Testament period, and also kind of corroborate some things in the New Testament. A lot of this has to do with personages. As a matter of fact, almost all of it has to do with personages. Okay, people who are written about in the New Testament or enter the New Testament story. They're not really written about because they're not. Some of them are not central to the story, but they're mentioned, and so we get some scriptural evidence about that. All right, so the first one that I would share with y'all is what's called the Pilate Stone. It dates to the early 1st century. It was discovered in 1961 at Caesarea Maritima. Caesarea Maritima simply means Caesarea by the sea. There are several Caesareas in the Roman Empire. This is the one that's located on the seacoast, and it is located in Palestine, okay, or Israel today. This particular stone dates to Pilate's lifetime. All right. By the way, who is Pilate? Who is Pontius Pilate?
Procurator. He's the governor of Judea.
He's the governor of Judea, and he tries Jesus. Okay, Jesus undergoes a couple of trials, and one of them is before Pilate, Pontius Pilate. So he's a Roman governor. He's the one that's actually going to pass the death sentence on Jesus because Jews couldn't do that. Okay, Jews at this period could not do that. A Roman governor had to do that, or whoever's in charge from the Roman side, and so. That's who Pontius Pilate is. So the inscription on there, which is in Latin, by the way, the inscription says, "To the divine Augusti, this Tiberium, Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, has dedicated this." Okay? So this Tiberium that he built is dedicated to the Roman emperors, and it's dedicated by Pontius Pilate. Okay? This is not unusual dedicatory inscriptions. You actually see these even today. We had a little bit of discussion about that Wednesday night, that if you go to an old area, there'll be some kind of a Texas historical marker saying this was the first bank in this town, or this was the first courthouse, or whatever. And maybe even some information about who built it. Sometimes schools are done that way. So if you see a big brand new school has been built, there'll be some plaque there that'll say that this person was a superintendent and so on and so forth. Yeah, he's in the ancient world as well. That's what that is. Significant about this is it mentions Pilate outside of the New Testament. He's mentioned in other places as well, but not tons of mentions of Pilate. It's not like we've got thousands of references to Pilate. We don't even have hundreds. We probably don't even have tens. Okay, but this is one. It's located at Caesarea Maritima. Again, discovered in 1961. So it is evidence confirming a person who is mentioned and significantly mentioned in the scriptures because he's the governor that actually puts Jesus to death. All right. So our next artifact is also an inscription. It's an object with an inscription. Okay, this is what's called the Caiaphas ossuary. It dates to the 1st century. It was discovered in 1990 in Jerusalem. That is a relatively new discovery. 1990 is like yesterday in archaeological terms. The Pilate Stone, 1961. A lot of these really big artifacts are discovered in the 1800s. This one is discovered in 1990 in Jerusalem. It mentions Caiaphas, of course, who is the high priest who was involved in condemning Jesus. Okay, Jesus undergoes a trial before the high priest. But it is Pilate that actually passes the death sentence, but Caiaphas wants that to happen. Okay, so he tries Jesus. Jesus is executed. Caiaphas lives out his life. Eventually he dies. And in 1st century Jerusalem, they had an interesting burial practice. They would build tombs in such a way that they could be reused. Okay, multiple generations. And so a body would be laid out on a stone bench, just like Jesus' body is laid out on a stone bench. When the flesh is decayed in about a year, the family would re-enter the tomb and they would move the bones. Okay, sometimes there was a receptacle built into the ground, a hole, basically where those bones would be swept off into, or they would do something like this, which is they would build a bone box. That's what an ossuary is. It's a bone box. The bones would be collected. They'd be placed in the bone box. Okay. And interestingly enough, one bone box could hold the bones of multiple individuals. So you would have a tomb that would be used over and over and over again. Jesus' tomb, by the way, I'll just throw this out there. Jesus' tomb, was it new or old?
New.
It was new. It had never been used, okay? So his body was in the tomb temporarily, okay? It's kind of like, that joke about, I just had a senior moment. See him. Not going to believe it on that. Joseph of Arimathea. Thank you, Stephen, for remembering that. Joseph of Arimathea. Why does he gives his tomb to Jesus, right? Now, Joseph didn't know that it would only be until Sunday. Joseph probably thought it was going to be forever. But he gets his tomb back on Monday, right? Because Jesus isn't there anymore. But normally this would be used over and over and over. Space is limited. Okay, when you're living in an area where people have been living there for centuries, space is limited. Otherwise, you end up with graves just about everywhere you would go. And in Jewish thinking, graves are clean or unclean?
Unclean.
They are unclean, ceremonially unclean. So you don't want graves just everywhere. And so you would put these in a bone box. Interesting about this particular bone ossuary contained the bones of several individuals, okay, one of whom was an elderly man. So the bones of the elderly man presumably would have been Caiaphas, okay? The inscription on the box tells us that it's Caiaphas, or the family of Caiaphas, and you might notice all of this work here. That's very ornate. That involved a lot of money. This is the ossuary for someone who was wealthy, okay? They would have all of that done that way because, after all, what's an ossuary used for? Bones. It's not like it's going to be in your living room, so it's not like an urn with ashes in it that you might want to have look nice. This is basically stuck in the ground somewhere, and yet even at that, it was done very ornately. Incidentally, I got to see that in 1990, probably would have been 1998, maybe late 1997, because that was on display in a museum in Vienna, and several of us from the Czech Republic made the bus ride or train ride, whatever it was, down to Vienna to see that. I remember, and I can peg the date because Ivana was great with child at the time, and the child she was with was Anna. Okay, so Anna didn't get to see it because Anna had not been born yet, but Anna was there, okay? And we got to see that. That was one of those things that just really a nice opportunity to get to see that. Otherwise, it's in Israel, so if you want to see it, you got to go to Israel to see it. Yes, Shelley?
How big are those?
Big enough to hold a femur, okay? So think about, the longest bone in the body is this bone right here, and what is that, about 24 inches?
Yeah.
So they're definitely big enough to hold that bone. Surprisingly, most of our bones just don't take up a lot of space. When you think about a skeleton, you lay all those bones out and you lay them nice and neat, if you will, in the bone. Not just throw them in there, don't just jumble them in there. It doesn't have to be huge, but it's a substantially sized object to be able to hold the longest bones.
Wow.
Tom?
Is that inscription? It doesn't look Hebrew, is it? What is that language?
That is in, I would assume, it's Aramaic. Okay? It could be Hebrew. Remembering, Hebrew of the first century is not, if you open a Bible, an Old Testament today in Hebrew, and you're looking at those characters, that's not what Hebrew looked like in the first century. Okay? Hebrew, the alphabet has undergone changes just like every alphabet does. It's like opening an English book from the 1100s. You would not even really recognize it as English based on the letters and how all that falls together. But this is, it's Hebrew script, I'm going to say it that way, from the first century. However, the language may be Aramaic. So you could not quote me and say it was in Hebrew, because it could be Aramaic, because Aramaic was what most of the Jews were speaking. And Aramaic, by the way, is written in the same script as Hebrew. Okay? So, by the way, in your Old Testaments, there's some sections of the Old Testament that are written in Aramaic, not Hebrew. However, if you're flipping through a Hebrew Old Testament, you would not know that unless you can read Aramaic and read Hebrew and know the difference between the two, because the script doesn't change. Tim, does that answer your question, Tom?
Yeah.
Okay. Tim?
Quick question. When you were there to see it, did you get to even touch it? Or
No. It's behind glass.
And then at the same time, is it made out of clay or what's it made out of?
It's made out of stone.
Just
Limestone.
Okay, limestone.
Limestone carved.
Wow.
Okay?
That takes
Not clay.
So
Clay would deteriorate
Yeah,
over
real
time.
quickly,
No,
yeah.
this is limestone. And no, you don't get to touch it.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, you don't get to touch really old things. It just, and there's a reason for that, because our skin oils can bring things into it that cause it to deteriorate. It's like, some of y'all have been to my house, I have some swords on my wall. I can almost tell when the guy is going to go up and touch my swords. And I usually stop him. Don't touch my swords. Because if you put your hands on that metal and I don't go and oil it afterwards, there will be your rusty fingerprints will be preserved on that. And I can get them off, but I have to take some special steel wool and get it off and then oil it. And so I just don't touch. Our skin oils just don't play well with things.
It's just like in a cave, the limestone.
Yeah, don't touch. Okay, because you introduce bacteria and things in there that then grow and don't belong there. So, no, most of the time you don't get to touch things like this because they're just too bad. It's like, go to D.C. and just try to touch the Constitution. See where that gets you. Probably in federal prison somewhere for doing that, because you're not supposed to touch those things.
So it's 15 inches high by 30 inches long.
There we go.
And its permanent location is the Israel Museum in Jerusalem.
And I expected that because it was excavated in Jerusalem in the modern era. Okay? A lot of the artifacts that are housed outside of the country where they were are from the old days when those areas were either protectorates of the countries doing the excavating, or where the countries doing the excavating didn't really care, or they paid a little bit of money. But when you start talking about excavations in the modern age, Israel's not going to say, oh, you found an ossuary. Well, you can take that off to London and display it there. It's on loan. They get loaned. That's it. So 30 inches long. So the length for a femur. Okay. And every other bone of the body is shorter than that. 15 inches tall. So what is that? About that tall and about that long. And some bones get lost over time. So it's kind of like... I think funerary practice is really interesting. By the way, it was an archaeologist who came and taught to my class when I was in middle school that really got me interested in these kinds of things, because he described the tomb, okay, and how basically he was kind of flippant, but he would say they basically scrape granddad off into the hole so that the next generation could be laid there. We don't do that in America. If we have a cemetery, we do everything we can to preserve it. That's why we have a lot of old cemeteries, and no one's being buried there anymore. No one even goes to visit anybody there anymore, but they're still there. In other countries, they can't do that. In Europe, they don't do that. In Europe, you pay rent on a grave. You pay rent on the grave. Your family pays rent, because obviously you're not, because you're dead. And so the family pays rent. And when there's no one left to pay rent, or no one cares, guess what happens? You lose that plot. And so they will go in and they will clean it out of everything that's in there. Coffins are generally wooden. They deteriorate. The bones and all of that. They will replace the headstone and put a new headstone for a new family. They're usually crypts. They're not single graves. And those bones are then usually collected and put in some kind of communal grave somewhere near the cemetery. That's why if you go to Europe and you're looking for your ancestors and where they're buried, at least in Central Europe, chances of you finding anybody more than 150 years back is virtually nothing. Unless they were really, really famous, you're not going to find their grave, because probably no one's been paying the rent for a long time. Oh, wow. Right? Well, it's very different for us because we've got all this land. We can bury people everywhere, right? And leave them there forever and always. In other parts of the world, including the Middle East, you can't do that. Think about how big Israel is. If you had everybody buried there over the last 3,000 years and you didn't reuse the areas, you'd run out of places to live or grow crops. Brenda?
In Louisiana, they bury everybody above ground.
Yes, for different reasons.
It's what's below sea level.
Because it's below sea level. Tim?
Just a question. Does the circles have any significance? Because I noticed on the next page, the other tombs.
I don't know whether they do. I don't know. It's probably just a motif that people really like. It's like, does Farmhouse Shabby have any?
Yeah. Shabby chic. Yeah.
Yeah, see, I didn't want to use that French word chic. Okay. Does Farmhouse chic have any particular significance?
No.
No, except it's the style, so a lot of people are paint their things in that way. Okay, you can tell architecturally when a house was built. Drive around and see a house from the 70s, and you know it was built in the 70s, right? Because of the way it looks. It has an architecture to it. Church buildings as well.
Well, this has got the fleur-de-lis on it and the canvas leaves.
It doesn't have a fleur-de-lis.
Oh, on the corner? Is that not a fleur-de-lis on that?
No fleur-de-lis.
Oh, it looks like it.
Nope. It's just, I don't know of any significance to that, except that it may have been popular at the time. All right? So that is the Caiaphas ossuary. Let me pull up the next one here. This is the Miriam ossuary. Okay? It was recovered in 2011. So just a couple of years after the other one. It's, again, very recently. This particular one was looted. Okay? In other words, it was not an archaeological excavation. It was robbed. Okay? It was looted out of a tomb. From a tomb in the Valley of Elah. We remember the Valley of Elah, right? What big thing happens in the Valley of Elah? Okay. Also homework assignment. Go find out what happened in the Valley of Elah. Okay. I'm not going to give it away. This is Bible drill. Only you got to go find the answer. Find out what happened in the Valley of Elah in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament period. The inscription on this ossuary, there's your inscription right up there. It's the same script, Todd, as the other one. So whether it's Hebrew or Aramaic, I don't know. But it indicates that Miriam, who was theoretically in that ossuary, was the granddaughter of Caiaphas. So we have two ossuaries from Caiaphas' family. Okay? The one in Jerusalem, that was for Caiaphas. Now we got Miriam, Caiaphas' granddaughter, who's out in the Valley of Elah. All right? These were influential families. They had a lot of members of the family. They're not all necessarily being buried in the same tomb. Miriam, I don't know, she might have been married to some guy who lived in the Valley of Elah. Hence, that's why she's buried there.
David and Goliath.
Yes, still Good. So Tom just made sure nobody has any homework. It was David and Goliath in the Valley of Elah. All right, that's the Miriam ossuary. Any questions about that? It's not nearly as ornate. Not nearly as ornate. Okay? I don't know whether it dates to a later period in Judaism, but remember, towards the end of the first century, things are not going well for the Jews in Palestine. They've had a big rebellion against the Romans. The Romans have killed a lot of people. Economically, the area is not doing very well. That might explain why it is clearly not as ornately done as Caiaphas's. Okay? And it's the granddaughter. Maybe she wasn't all that significant. Caiaphas was a high priest. He's significant. All right. Next artifact to share with y'all is yet another ossuary. This particular one is called the James ossuary. And the inscription on this box, which by the way is very plain, okay? They're not all ornate. This one is very, very plain. It has an inscription on it. Somewhere in here, you can see it just barely in there. The inscription says, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Okay? There's a lot of controversy about that particular ossuary, whether it really is genuine or not. Now, the box is genuine. The box is genuine. The box dates to the 1st century. It is made from, take a wild guess, limestone. Okay? Lots of building materials in Palestine are made out of limestone. So it's an important rock in the area. Or it's not important. It's just there's a lot of rock. There's a lot of limestone. Okay? So you got this ossuary. The ossuary is dated to the 1st century. The only question is the inscription. Because if you find a plain box like that, you could theoretically do what? Write a fake inscription, right? And people who make fake artifacts are very good at what they do. And so they know how Aramaic/Hebrew, whatever that language is, they know how the letters were written in the 1st century. Now, the problem with making an inscription into a box like this is the box has patina. Patina is that stuff that forms on anything that's old. Okay, or has been in the ground, or has been in a cave, because that's where ossuaries are usually found, in caves, okay, tombs. So you get this patina that's on there, and the problem is, if you make an inscription in that patina, what do you do by necessity?
Remove the patina
Take it away.
and expose the stone.
You've exposed the stone, remove the patina. And so those same guys that are really good at writing inscriptions are really good at faking the patina. Remember I said you can buy all sorts of neat things on eBay, but you sure better be careful who you're buying them from, because there's lots of fakes out there, right? And so, if somebody comes along and says, I've got this incredibly wonderful artifact and you're just in love with it and it costs $2,000 or $3,000, I would highly suggest you make sure that person's reputable. Now, if it's a Bible page that only costs $20, you're not out a whole lot of money if you do that, okay? But you have to buy from reputable dealers, and there are a lot of dealers that are not reputable. The antiquities market in Jerusalem is flooded with fakes. And so the question is it genuine or not? Is the inscription genuine? And they're arguing about that, and they're going to keep arguing about that. Because if it is a fake, it's a really good one. So, what's interesting about it is if it is genuine, if the inscription is genuine, this is undoubtedly the James that we know from the Bible. Because typically an inscription would have been James, the son of Joseph, in. You don't identify yourself by who your brother is. You identify by who your parents were, or even maybe your grandparents. Okay? So this particular one, the inscription is James, son of Joseph. James is not an unusual name. Joseph is not an unusual name. Jesus is not an unusual name in the first century among the Jews. Okay? James is what? What's James in Hebrew? Jacob. Okay? Joseph is Joseph. Jesus is Joshua. Very typical Jewish names. Okay? So the only question is that part of the inscription, brother of Jesus. Whoever the Jesus was, he had to have been significant enough that he gets his name written on the ossuary. So when you put, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably what? It's probably a duck. Okay? So if it's genuine and you've got those three names written in that way, then it would undoubtedly, virtually undoubtedly be the James that we know from scriptures. Stacy?
So, our ideas of authentication are a little bit different, right, than maybe people would have had way back then. So they may have known this is what this was. It had some patina, and they decided later to put this on it. I mean, that's a possibility as well.
Absolutely, it's a possibility. But they would have to do something with the patina, and they have. Okay, it's not like the inscription has nothing in it. It does. And so they analyze the patina up here as opposed to the patina in the etching.
Within the etching.
And I will tell you, you got people on both sides of that are saying, yes, it's genuine. Others that are saying, no, it's not.
So I would say, if it wasn't inscribed initially, and the family knew what it was, and they decided to do it later, that doesn't necessarily preclude.
Well, no. I see what you're saying, and the answer to that would be no, because these are housed in tombs. Okay?
Which they still go back into.
Yes, but you would not have had, they might have done it after the fact.
Right.
But it would have been genuine from that standpoint. But your patina doesn't change that much over a period of 50 years.
Okay, I see what you're
Okay?
saying. The patina would only be different, substantially different. It was a lot longer than that.
That's exactly right. If it was etched in, say, 19, when was it discovered, what year? I didn't tell you what year. I'm not even sure I put it up there. I don't think I have it in my notes either. So let me see. I might have it in my notes. Hang on just a second. I do have some notes here. Okay, so I will tell you what I wrote. The exact provenance is unknown. In other words, we don't know where it came from. It's currently owned by a private collector. All of these things raise lots of red flags. Okay? If it had been uncovered in an archaeological excavation, there would not be any question about this. It's when we don't know where it came from. And it's in the collection of a private collector. The trial of the collector on forgery charges gave a verdict of not guilty. He was actually, the guy that owns it was actually put on trial on charges of forgery. In Israel, he was found not guilty. Now, you know as well as I know that that's not the end of the story, because lots of guilty people are actually guilty. You just can't prove it in a court of law. So that doesn't really answer the question. But in his favor, he can say, I was found not guilty. Okay? Nothing else on my notes is any different than what I already said. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. I did give you at least some information about where it comes from, or at least what we know about it. But again, your patina develops over centuries, and that's what's hard to duplicate. It's amazing what we can learn from people. So you've maybe seen some of those crime shows where they're analyzing a dead body, and they might do isotope. analysis of the bones and teeth specifically, because we absorb things from where we are. Ivana undoubtedly has some Chernobyl radiation in her teeth because she was still growing when the Chernobyl disaster happened and the cloud of radiation went across that part of Europe. So she probably has some isotopes from that. So if they were to analyze her teeth, no one would ever do that. They have no reason to. But if they did, they might find some of those isotopes. My isotopes, by the way, are going to be different because I spent 16 years living in Europe in the area where that radiation came through. It doesn't mean that we're going to die of cancer or anything like that. But you pick up these things from where you are. Aaron is an airline pilot. I have no doubt that he's got some isotopes that maybe most normal people. Not most normal. Most people who are not in the air all the time maybe don't have. Okay? We pick up things from our environment. Patina picks up from his environment. So the patina in Jerusalem is going to be different than the patina in West Texas. It's just not going to be the same. Your minerals are different. The whatever's living and growing in that area is going to be different. And so that's what it hinges on. It hinges on that inscription, not on the box itself. But again, forgers are very, very good because there's money in it. Because after all, if that is really the ossuary of James, the brother of Jesus, can you put a price tag on that? And therein is the issue. Okay? So fakes and forgeries are always out there. You have to be careful of them. There's never any doubt when it's in an archaeological excavation. The doubt comes when it shows up on the antiquities market, shows up in a private collection. All right, so let's go ahead and move on because we're finishing this one today. Okay? Even if I told you, we're finishing this one. All right, this next one is the Nazareth inscription. It dates to the early 1st century. Okay? Excuse me. Language of the inscription is, anybody take a wild guess? You look up there and see? It's Greek. Okay? It's different script than what we've seen so far. And this is what the inscription says. Edict of Caesar. It is my decision concerning graves and tombs. Whoever has made them for the religious observances of parents or children or household members, that these remain undisturbed forever. But if anyone legally charges that another person has destroyed or has in any manner extracted those who have been buried, or has moved with wicked intent those who have been buried to other places, the inscription continues, committing a crime against them, or has moved sepulchre-sealing stones, against such a person I order that a judicial tribunal be created, just as is done concerning the gods and human religious observances. Even more so will it be obligatory to treat with honor those who have been entombed. You are absolutely not to allow anyone to move those who have been entombed, but if someone does, I wish that violator to suffer capital punishment under the title of tomb breaker. Oh boy. So, grave robbing is punishable by death. Significant about this inscription is, one, you don't rob graves. Two, it's coming out of Nazareth. Now, I know Jesus is not buried in Nazareth, was not buried in Nazareth. He is, his present tense is not buried anywhere. But he was not buried in Nazareth. But it's just interesting that in the 1st century, we have this kind of an inscription, okay, indicating that there might have been some questions about this going around. Because after all, what is the Jewish accusation against the disciples of Jesus?
They moved his body.
Yeah, they stole it. Okay, they stole it. That's actually recorded in the New Testament. We talked about that. We talked about evidences for the resurrection. Okay, so if you have this, maybe it's a reaction to all of those discussions going on, because the Jews didn't just drop that. That was their stock answer for a while. Maybe, if nothing else, this at least tells us that if the disciples had stolen the body of Jesus, they took a great risk to do so. They committed a capital offense for which they would be executed if they were caught. Why would you do that? And that's a question that goes back to that class on the resurrection. Okay, why would they steal Jesus' body? And then why later, when they're facing the sentence of death for being Christians, that is based on the belief in the resurrection, why would they die for something like that if they knew they were the ones that stole the body? All right. So let's continue on.
Didn't Mary assume Jesus was the gardener of the area and say, where have you moved his body to?
Yes. All right, so another little piece of archaeological enlightenment, if you will. I think this is a replica of the original. The original is probably in the museum, the Israel Museum. This is a bone, obviously, and with a big nail through it. This particular bone belonged to a fellow whose name was Yehohanan. He was the son of Haggakol. Notice how he's identified. Yehohanan, son of Haggakol. That's usually how things were done. It dates to the 1st century. It is a heel bone. It was discovered in an ossuary in Jerusalem in 1968. It belonged to a male who was of the age of about 24 to 28 years old. His height would have been about 5'6", so about 4 inches shorter than me. Okay. By the way, people in the ancient world were shorter than we are today, so that probably would not have been remarkably short. Okay, he was probably of average height for that time. What's interesting about this artifact is that it is proof that at least in some exceptional cases, victims of crucifixion were given a proper burial. Most crucifixion victims were fed to the animals. They were thrown out. Or they were allowed to stay on the cross until the birds picked them clean. Or they were thrown in the city dump. They were not given an honorable burial. Okay? Just like today, in the past, an honorable burial was an important thing. And if the Romans had crucified somebody, that is a dishonorable death. Crucifixion was reserved for the most part for people that were committing crimes against the Roman state. That's who usually got crucified. And so those bodies were almost entirely gone. By the way, crucifixion nails are also fairly unusual because, one, iron's valuable. We don't appreciate that so much today because you can go to Home Depot and buy all the nails you want. Iron is valuable in the ancient world, and crucifixion nails, and y'all are going to love this, nails used in crucifixion were considered by other people to have magical properties. They were good luck charms. And so people who had nails that were undoubtedly, or at least said, to have been used in a crucifixion, those would have been valuable as well. This nail is not extracted. And the answer to the question of why, if somebody asked that question, why is it not extracted?
Why is it not?
It's not extracted.
Part.
See that right there? They believe that when it was hammered through, this part would have gone into the wood of the cross, and it hit a knot in the wood and bent. And when it bent, it would have been very hard to pull it out. And so in the interest of time and saving some work, that nail just gets left behind. By the way, on some antiquities websites, you can find Roman nails for sale. Yes, you can. They're usually about $100. They will tell you they're Roman nails. I do not have one of those Roman nails. For a reason, and that reason, because it'd be really cool to use in class, right? Here's a Roman nail. This is what a crucifixion nail was used for. Maybe I'll get one of those one of these days. But it's going to be with a huge caveat, because there were already forgeries in the ancient world. Okay? And so you got to be careful again buying something like that. But this is not a forgery. That's a real Roman nail in a real bone of someone who's crucified. By the way, since that time, they have found, are you ready for this? 2 other individuals who were clearly the victims of crucifixion. One of them is in Britain. I'm not sure about the other one. Maybe in Spain. Think about how vast the Roman Empire was. Think about how many thousands of people were crucified. Crucifixion was not uncommon. Thousands of people over the centuries of the Roman Empire were crucified. And we have archaeological evidence of 3. Because most of the time, they were just thrown out. And the nails were removed so you could use them the next time. So, you would think that there would be hundreds of examples, but there aren't because of how the bodies were treated. All right? But at least in some cases they were. And the reason that's important is because critics will say, if Jesus had been crucified, he would not have been buried. Remember, Joseph goes and asks for the body of Jesus. That's unusual. And it's unusual that Pilate lets him have it. And that he's actually buried in a tomb. But here we have evidence from outside of the Bible that indeed it did happen, even if rarely. All right, any questions about that? By the way, you can... all these things that preachers know about, right? You can buy a replica like that. Okay, I saw one about $100. So, one of those, show and tell. Bring it to class and hand it over here and start at Linda. It can go around. You get a feel for that. That brings it home, doesn't it? When you think about crucifixion and what crucifixion involved, that brings it home. Can you imagine a nail like that being driven through your heel bone? And what that must have felt like. I cannot even imagine what that was. Okay? So, alright. Last inscription is the Erastus inscription from Corinth. It also dates to the 1st century, excavated in 1929. Here you see it in the foreground. How many of y'all been to Corinth? Stacy's been to Corinth. Y'all have been to Corinth. Have you seen that? Good, you saw a replica of it. Because the original's not sitting there in the ground anymore. Okay? But you did see a replica. They do have a replica there. The original is now housed elsewhere. Alright, so the inscription is in Latin, and it's abbreviated. Latin loves to abbreviate things. And the inscription would have read in its full form without the abbreviation, Erastus pro edilitate sua pecunia strabi. That's my Latin pronunciation, which is really terrible. The English equivalent is Erastus, in return for his aedileship, paved at his own expense. So an aedileship allowed Erastus to, it's a public office, okay? And so he gets appointed to the public office, and how does he say thank you? I'll build something really spectacular, and I'll make an inscription there so that everybody knows how important I am. This is not erected afterwards. This is not after Erastus is dead. This is while Erastus is alive. Erastus is referred to in the New Testament in Acts chapter 19, verse 22, also Romans chapter 16, verse 23, also 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 20. So we read about this Erastus in these three references, and it is this Erastus, okay? Not some other fellow named Erastus. It is this guy right here who laid this pavement at his own expense. Oh, isn't it such a change that our politicians today build all sorts of nice things at our expense? In the ancient world, it was a lot of wealthy people who sometimes built things at their expense. All right, so let's just kind of wrap this up. Again, testimony of biblical archaeology, we have a wide range of artifacts, and you've seen that in the class. Okay? They're from monumental to simple seals. They sometimes in italics, confirm details, events, and persons described in the Bible, like Erastus, like Caiaphas. Okay? However, what they always do is they always illuminate the biblical world. When we study archaeology, it helps us to understand the world of the Bible so much better. And I can trace my interest in these things back to probably would have been 1982, 83, when a college professor comes and talks to a bunch of junior high kids about how they buried people in first century Jerusalem. And it lit a spark in me. I still remember his name. He's still alive. Okay, he's a professor, maybe a retired professor. He's written some books. And I actually went to high school with his son. So, and his daughter, I guess, a couple of kids. He had a large family, all right? And so it opens the world, it opens the outside, the biblical world for us, because it's not our world. Okay. All right, so that was all of that. Wednesday night, we're going to do Understanding Evolution. Hopefully you have the papers, because I know some of y'all may not be here Wednesday night. It will be live streamed, so there will be a recording of it as long as nothing malfunctions.